Once upon a time, in a small village nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside, there lived a tortoise and a hare who were the best of friends. The tortoise, whose name was Tim, was a slow and steady creature, always taking his time and methodically thinking through every problem that came his way. The hare, on the other hand, was a wild and impulsive creature, always darting here and there and never seeming to think before he acted. Despite their differences, Tim and the hare, whose name was Hare, were inseparable. They spent their days exploring the fields and forests that surrounded their village, and they often raced each other just for fun. Hare always won, of course, but Tim never seemed to mind. He was content to take his time and enjoy the journey, while Hare was always in a rush to get somewhere. One day, the village held a big race between Tim and Hare to determine who was the fastest. The director of the race was a wise old owl who had lived in the village for many years. He had seen many races in his time, and he knew how to make sure that everything went smoothly. The race was held on a sunny afternoon, and the entire village turned out to watch. Tim and Hare were both nervous, but they were also excited to finally see who was the faster of the two. As the race began, Hare took off like a shot, darting and weaving through the crowd with ease. Tim, on the other hand, plodded along slowly but steadily, taking his time and conserving his energy. As the race wore on, Hare's lead grew and grew. He was far ahead of Tim, and it seemed like there was no way that the tortoise could catch up. But Tim was determined to give it his all, and he continued to plod along, never giving up. As the finish line came into sight, Hare slowed down to catch his breath. He had been running at top speed for so long that he was starting to get tired. Tim, on the other hand, was still going strong, and he began to close the gap between them. In the end, Tim crossed the finish line just a few seconds behind Hare, and the entire village erupted in cheers. Tim had proved that slow and steady really does win the race, and he had gained the respect and admiration of everyone in the village. After the race, Tim and Hare returned to their homes, which were just a few houses down from each other. Tim lived in a small, cozy cottage that he had built with his own two hands. It was simple and unassuming, but it was filled with all of the comforts of home. Hare, on the other hand, lived in a grand mansion that was filled with all sorts of luxurious amenities. He had inherited his wealth from his parents, who had been successful business people, and he had never had to lift a finger in his life. Despite the differences in their living arrangements, Tim and Hare were still the best of friends. They spent their days exploring the countryside, racing each other, and enjoying each other's company. One day, Tim decided that it was time to upgrade his home. He wanted something a bit more comfortable and spacious, so he began to look for a new place to live. After much searching, he found a beautiful piece of land that was just a few miles outside of the village. It was perfect, with rolling hills, a babbling brook, and plenty of space for Tim to build the home of his dreams. Tim began to work on his new home right away, and he spent every spare moment laboring away on it. He built a sturdy foundation, erected walls, and added a roof. He even put in a refrigerator and a stove, so that he could cook and store food. As he worked on his new home, Tim couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. He had always been self-sufficient and resourceful, and it was satisfying to see his hard work paying off. But as the days went by, Tim started to notice something strange. Every time he went to check on the progress of his home, he found that someone had been there before him and had made changes to his design. At first, he thought it might be Hare, who was known for his mischievous ways. But as the changes became more and more elaborate, Tim began to suspect that someone else was involved. One day, Tim decided to set a trap to catch the culprit. He left a few tools lying around, and then he waited and watched from a hidden spot. To his surprise, he saw a group of rabbits sneaking around his construction site. They were pulling and tugging at the walls, trying to reshape them to their liking. Tim was outraged. These rabbits were ruining all of his hard work, and he wasn't going to stand for it. He marched over to them and confronted them, demanding that they stop their mischief at once. The rabbits were taken aback by Tim's outburst, and they quickly retreated. But as they ran away, one of them turned and shouted an obscene word at Tim, showing their disdain for the tortoise and his home. Tim was shocked and offended by the rabbit's behavior, and he knew that he had to do something about it. He decided to take matters into his own hands and start breeding his own rabbits to counteract the ones causing trouble. He spent hours studying rabbit breeding and care, learning everything he could about how to raise healthy, well-behaved rabbits. As the weeks went by, Tim's rabbit breeding project began to bear fruit. His rabbits were happy and well-behaved, and they quickly became a model for the rest of the rabbit community. Tim was proud of what he had accomplished, and he knew that his hard work had paid off. But despite his success, Tim still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from his life. He realized that what he really needed was someone to share it all with. And so, he began to look for a mate. At first, Tim had no luck finding anyone who seemed like a good match. But then, one day, he met a beautiful tortoise named Tina. She was kind, intelligent, and independent, and Tim knew right away that she was the one for him. They quickly fell in love, and before long, they were married and living together in Tim's new home. Tim and Tina were happy together, and they spent their days exploring the countryside and enjoying each other's company. They even started a family, and before long, they had a few little tortoises of their own. Everything seemed to be going perfectly, until one day something terrible happened. A group of rabbits, led by the same one who had shouted obscenities at Tim, attacked their home and tried to destroy it. Tim and Tina were devastated, and they knew that they had to do something to protect their family and their home. So, they gathered all of their courage and stood up to the rabbits, fighting to defend what was rightfully theirs. In the end, they were able to drive the rabbits away and protect their home, but the experience left them shaken and reflective. As they sat on their porch, surrounded by their family, Tim and Tina couldn't help but wonder why the rabbits had tried to harm them. They had always lived in harmony with their animal neighbors, and they couldn't understand what could have driven the rabbits to such violent behavior. After much thought and discussion, they came to the realization that the root of the problem was jealousy. The rabbits had always been envious of Tim and Tina's success, and they couldn't stand to see them happy and content. Tim and Tina learned a valuable lesson that day. They learned that it was important to be true to themselves and to follow their dreams, no matter what others might say or do. And they also learned that it was important to stand up for what they believed in and to defend their loved ones no matter what. From that day on, Tim and Tina lived happily ever after, surrounded by their loving family and their beautiful home. And they knew that no matter what challenges they might face, they were strong enough to overcome them, as long as they stood together and worked as a team.